Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Zing from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization that invests in and helps build deep tech startups that leverage science and technology to make lives better for all. A big part of our work is to build a global community of leaders and doers who are driving deep tech innovations such as AI, medtech, quantum tech in our economy and society. Before Suchi, our moderator for the day, starts us off, I'd like to invite our SGInnovate CEO, Dr. Lim Jui, on the screen to say a few words. Dr. Lim, please.
Okay, very good morning to everyone. Really excited to be here. For those of you who are not in the know, this is actually the first event I'm speaking at since I joined SGInnovate 2 weeks ago. So my job is to introduce, on behalf of SGInnovate, a session that we hope will spice up your house arrest. Yeah. Now, the topic of research commercialization is very close to my heart. I've been doing this pretty much for the last 2 decades. And in my last job, which I had held for almost 8 years, I was at NTU running Intuitive, which is the innovation enterprise company of NTU. And its job was research commercialization. Yeah. This is such a difficult thing to do. You have an idea. You try to protect the intellectual property. From that stage, you try to build a prototype. And it's iterative, right? As you build a prototype, you also try to refine the intellectual property to help build a proper defense around it. So that one day, if and when you do make it to the market, you have effectively monopoly position. Once that is done, then there is the hard work of transferring research into manufacturing. So you need to work with manufacturers. In the case of medical devices, which is the subject of today's webinar, you also have to work with regulators. And then let's not forget the biggest challenge, at least in Singapore, getting funding, whether from public sources or from private sources. So, you know, it is a whole process filled with uncertainty and risk. So, you know, it's the brave few who persist. In Singapore, there are not that many in medtech, but I'm happy to say that SGInnovate is now moving away from its traditional stronghold in IT-related deep tech into new areas. MedTech is one of them, and I think it's critical that we continue to invest in MedTech, if only because MedTech actually offers a greater shot, a better shot at targeted care than do drugs, for instance. Additionally, if we just look at the profile of our country, you know, this is a country that has built its economic foundations on engineering strength and healthcare strength. So MedTech brings 2 great strengths, well-defined strengths together, right? So, you know, I've been doing MedTech since, I don't know, you know, 2005, 2006. I was involved in the Singapore Stanford Biodesign program. And, you know, my thesis back then was precisely that we can't lose. This is something that we should be very, very good at. So the challenge for us is to put the pieces together to help entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs succeed. What we have today is a very interesting group of individuals. They are 3 projects that we have either helped to fund or are in the process of helping to fund, principally through public funding in the first instance. The 3 individuals that you see today really represent they really are exemplars of the process. So if we look at Priyanka, for instance, Priyanka and Harold, maybe less Harold, but Harold's co-founder, were both biodesign fellows. So they were specifically trained for this task. Yep. Harold himself has a very interesting background, doing his PhD at Imperial, and then moving on to MIT and Toronto. I can't remember if they're for postdocs. Harold, you can tell us more later. And then we don't have a representative from Clicks, which is the third company today, but what we have in place of the founders of Clicks is Dr. Jasmine Chu, who is from SGInnovate. And Jasmine is, although she's not the entrepreneur, she is really hand-holding these projects, and she will tell you a little bit more about all the little things that need to be done to get a medical device ready to be invested, and then hopefully to enter the market. But let me just come back to the original point. These three really are, you know, this is best case scenarios, right? There are many best case scenarios. First and foremost, the inventor must be interested enough to spend time to see his idea become a product, right? And that's true for both Harold as well as the founders of Clicks. But then beyond that, if you look at Priyanka has thrown it all in. She's not doing anything else. So, you know, Priyanka is the true entrepreneur here. So there are many different levels of entrepreneurship and would-be entrepreneurship. And this is only the first step. It doesn't mean that they'll succeed. You know, so you're going to need help. In the case of professors who are not prepared to leave academia, they're going to need to find people to help give birth to their companies. So it's a long road. The three individuals here today are here to share their experience. SGInnovate, you know, this is what we were set out to do, which is to help would-be entrepreneurs bring products and services that benefit humanity into the market. Yeah. So thank you all for spending this hour with us. As always, especially since this is, you know, we're venturing into medtech for the first time. If you have any feedback at all, please feel free to share them with us either through the chat group or in your questions, or, you know, just follow up with us after the event. Let me end here and pass you over to Suchi, who's also from SGInnovate, who is the moderator for today's session. Suchi.
Thank you. Thank you, Dre. We're very honored to have you open this event as your very first public event after taking over as CEO. So thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Suchitra Narayan, Suchi for short. Those of you that don't know me, I'm a director with SGInnovate's venture building arm. I'm very excited to be your moderator today because commercialization is something I'm very passionate about. So prior to joining SGInnovate, I spent about 6 years doing strategic advisory for APAC leaders on precisely this, right? Business development, commercial strategies, go-to-market. In our venture building team within SGInnovate, we work hand in hand with our researchers to translate R&D in Singapore into commercially viable ventures. So why this topic today, right? At SGInnovate, we invest in deep tech companies, you know, companies that are founded in the roots of scientific rigor and IP and are disrupting the way that business is done, whether it's quantum technologies, medical technologies, or even robotics. We've had many coffees with some of you in the audience, discussions with deep tech founders, startups, academics, scientists. And what we found is really there's a lot of value in partnering with scientists who bring that technology to the table to support them in commercializing their ideas, in being their business consultant, in bringing their ideas to global market. And there is that gap between technology and commercialization. And SGInnovate is one of the pillars in Singapore that addresses this, right? Which is why we're here today to discuss research commercialization. We plan to test a slightly different format today rather than to just have a panel Q&A. What I'll do is I'll have a short discussion with each of the companies. So we do have medtech, but we also have robotics represented today in our panel. And I want you as the audience to get a flavor for the scientists behind the research as well as the technology itself. We will then follow it up with a panel discussion on commercialization, and then I'll open up for Q&A. So as those questions come up in your mind, put it into the Q&A box, and I'll be sure to try to pick up where you typed it. So we're going to get started with wind, and the founder of the project, Priyanka. Priyanka, can I ask you to introduce yourself, the scientist behind the name and the technology that you are building today?
Thank you, Suchitra and Dr. Lim, thank you for the kind words, and good morning to all of you. So my name is Kenneth Priyanka Prasad, or just I prefer to use Priyanka. I'm one of the founders for Prime Recipe, which is a very early stage pre-spin-off at this point of time still, focusing on the unmet needs in the respiratory and critical care space, which I'm going to do a little bit of a format where I introduce WIN first before I kind of share a little bit more about my own background here. So along with my co-founder, Dr. Albert Lim, who's a senior consultant from the Respiratory and Critical Care Department from Tan Tock Seng Hospital, we are currently developing the WIN system, which is, to keep it very simple, an integrated therapeutic and disease management system that uses percussive acoustics and AI technology to manage people with chronic mucous respiratory issues. My own background in this entire piece of the puzzle is that of a biomedical engineer. I got my doctorate from Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, where I was working largely on synthesizing nanomaterial systems for a variety of biomedical applications such as biobatteries and antibacterial formulations. Following that, as Dr. Lim pointed out a little bit earlier, I did a year-long fellowship in health technology innovation called as the Singapore Stanford Biodesign Fellowship. There I worked in a multidisciplinary team for a year-long, over a long period of a year, where we learned and iteratively applied the process of value-centric, needs-driven innovation over and over again till we kind of really understood this whole process, which is the crux of which is actually based off design thinking, applying design thinking principles to healthcare, with added dimensions in regulatory and reimbursements, which need to be considered in the context of a healthcare system. So yeah, that's really me in a very quick nutshell about the WIN. So let me just quickly walk everybody through in terms of what is WIN about and who is it that we really target. So when I mention chronic mucus issues, essentially, I'd love the audience if you could think about the time where you had the worst flu of your lives, or even we just think about the current situation where we are today with the COVID-19, which is happening, which is, you have this really bad flu, which doesn't allow you to breathe, which gives you difficulty in breathing, and you're hacking up your lung trying to get something out from your chest, but you really can't. And the thing is, there are over 250 million people around the world, across the globe, who suffer from this on a day-to-day basis. And for them, this mucus is more than just persistent symptoms, what I mentioned, which is what you suffer, which you suffer on an acute basis. But to them, it also is expensive hospitalizations, which come on an annual basis because of really bad exacerbations what they develop. And to Singapore itself, we spend over 150 million at this point of time, just based on what the expenses what these patients amount to. And today, the way you can treat this mucus for these chronic patients is extremely inadequate. It's almost akin to having someone using you like a bongo drum. You really use a very archaic mechanical method to try and get this mucus out of your chest. It's someone hitting you on the chest, someone hitting you on the back, and you do it for an extended period of time. And this mechanical forces essentially help in loosening this mucus and bringing it up as you can cough it out. As you can imagine from the description itself, the treatment is not really the best. It's got low efficacy because people don't like doing it. You have to do it for extended durations. In a day, you need to at least do it for an hour and a half. People obviously hate its intrusiveness, the fact that they need to depend on somebody else for getting their day-to-day care. And caregivers, and it's not just the patients who really suffer from this, it's also the caregivers, the people who are with these patients day in, day out. It could be a partner, it could be a spouse, it could be a registered nurse who you bring in to administer care. It's difficult, it's tiring for them, and this compromises its effectiveness. Not to mention that I'm talking about mucus here as a problem, and you would remember I mentioned a moment ago that hospitalizations are often a problem for these patients. That's because for these people, if clearance is not done adequately, they can develop respiratory infections. And given the chronic nature of the disease, these patients are closely monitored, or need to be rather closely monitored, to make sure that they don't actually enter the healthcare system and they can be kept out. Because every hospitalization, what they go through, can be both fatal as well as expensive for these patients. So there's extremely poor monitoring and management, which is at this point of time, it's something which is purely verbal based, what a patient may or may not report to their doctor. So we realize that there's an unmet need here, not just in the therapeutic element of it, but also in monitoring and managing what is this extremely expensive condition. Which is where we basically came in with the WIND system, which effectively provides a combination of superior and user-friendly therapy alongside personalized disease management using data-driven monitoring and interventions to monitor patient outcomes and reduce the burden of disease. So yeah, so Suchi, that's basically WIND, and what is it who are we going after? Who are the patients? What is the unmet need we're addressing here, and what do we have in here to address that unmet need?
Wonderful, thank you for that sharp, snappy introduction. So one thing that was interesting, Priyanka, which I think Jui alluded to as well, is this whole concept of needs-based innovation, and that's, I suppose, sprung up from your time at the biodesign course. So tell us a little bit about the journey of identifying that specific problem to fit a specific solution for a specific market, because it was a conceptualization to needs-based.
So what I can do for this part is, Suchi, I can talk a little bit about the program itself. So, if there are interested innovators out here who might want to consider moving into healthcare innovation, they might find it interesting. And I'll touch on exactly what is it we did through the process. Mm-hmm. So this whole element of needs-based innovation for us, something which we were trained rigorously during the course of the fellowship, is largely to do with the fact that we have three core pillars to this. We have the identification of an unmet need. We have the invention of a solution to implement it, and a methodology and a very gradated way of implementing and getting the solution to the end users. And this is a largely iterative process. It's not something where you go in thinking that, oh, I have this fantastic problem. It's no one hands the problem over to us. We find the problem, and we find the problem by going through an extremely rigorous and methodical approach and analysis of identifying this problem using almost like a focus and flare approach. What we really do in each of these three pillars is we flare out, find hundreds of needs, and this, which is pretty much the first step of the process, involves clinical immersion. So we spend a lot of time on the ground with hospitals, following different clinicians, and I was very fortunate that during my time as a fellow, we were exposed to three different healthcare settings, which are sharply different from each other. We spent some time in the United States, we spent some time in Singapore, we spent some time in Indonesia and Korea as well. So that's more than three actually. Different healthcare settings, different resources, different ways of managing these solutions, and just really different granularity to the kind of problems we could also see. So during this period, in the time we spent in the hospitals, we found out hundreds and hundreds of problems in a specific clinical theme, of course, following which we applied this process, we applied this thinking, and we filtered down to coming down to those few top problems which had potential, which had market, which had stakeholder support. And these are some of the different factors we consider in when we're actually analyzing which problem we want to work on. And then the process starts over again, because now we go into the invention aspect of it, where we again sort of flare out, come up with the craziest possible ideas we can to try and develop solutions which are targeted to solving these particular problems. So it's not technologies which, in a team of four during my time, it was not technologies which we were maybe experts in. Some of them were, like I myself am a nanomaterial I'm a nanomaterial scientist, right? So it doesn't mean that all the solutions we came up with, I'm sure as you can see from WIND, it's got probably not so much to do with nanotechnology. And it's got everything to do with actually specifically addressing the problem which we set out to find, which we found, and we saw that there was value in. So then we develop these innovations, and we again focus down using different pillars like IP, regulatory, reimbursement, all these different factors to identify that, okay, this is the most viable solution which can now be translated and into the implementation phase. During our time, of course, our large focus was on the first two phases of the program. And I'm, as you can see now, slowly transitioning from the invention phase and the proof phase into a little bit more of the implementation focus thing, where we are now looking at commercializing and moving this from a lab to commercial sort of movement there. And throughout this process, stakeholders play a very major role. Stakeholders are not just people like funders or people like clinicians, because we're in the area of medical innovation, but it is also the end users, it's also regulators, it's also reimbursed. All their inputs which keep coming at different parts of this process all drive us through that final decision on what is it that we are working on and what is it that we are inventing. So it's a lot of smart people. I was probably the least smart of the group, coming together and translating and identifying and using a collective brain power to sort of come down to what might be a potential solution which adds value to the patient cycle of care. And this process was obviously done during my time, as I mentioned, as a Singapore Stanford Biodesign Fellow, which was a fellowship which was joint partnership which began between the agency between A-STAR, EDB, and Stanford University. It started off in 2010. And this was modeled after the Stanford Biodesign program, the Biodesign program in Stanford University, which was and it's basically a capability development initiative to train and nurture the next generation of medtech innovators in Singapore and Asia. Last year, SSB then converted to Singapore Biodesign in line with their move to be more Asia-centric and Asia-focused with their innovation training. So the information is available on A-STAR's website, and anyway, you can go and look. And if it's something which people out there or the listeners are interested in finding out more, I'm sure there's a lot of information there on the website as well. Suchitra, I can't hear you.
Great, I was on mute. Thank you for that. Joys of Zoom. So I said, thank you. Thank you for that. I certainly found that very helpful, and hopefully the audience did as well, because it will spark some ideas for the audience. And really quickly, Priyanka, I will move to the next company project shortly, but very quickly, within a minute, we are, as SGInnovate, certainly very excited to have somebody of your caliber, your drive, working with us as a project partner. And every single project that we work on is humbling, it's fascinating. But what is the nature of the support you sort of seek from partners, and what was the nature of support that you sought from SGInnovate?
So I think this kind of ties back to, the way my project developed, which I alluded to back in my journey as well, is, the early development of our project as we moved from being a concept to actually something on the bench, like a prototype on the bench. We did that with the help, like a lot of help and support from both Singapore Biodesign as well as the Smart Ignition research fundings, which are government fundings, which are available. And I think during this process, while I was working with Dr. Albert Lim, who's my clinical co-founder, we also realized that, as we were transitioning from being a tech on bench to where we need to get our next tranche of major funding or major support, during some of the conversations we were having with some of the stakeholders in the funding ecosystem, we realized that there's a gap which we need to address. We needed to go to humans, and we needed to go to humans fast because of the nature of the industry we were in. And for us to overcome that, and it was not just resources what we required. We also needed an experienced team. And that's really where Simon from the venture building, SGI's venture building team really came in, because not only is he an experienced venture builder who will be very crucial for us, he also brings to the team the sorely missing commercial expertise, which we don't have. And that's something we require in this upcoming phase of development, where we have to develop to get to humans, but we have to do so in a manner which adds value to the entire process and allows us to move quickly in this entire chain of development. And I think it's not just that. I think for us, the other element, which was a very important consideration, was the long-term continuity of the project and, you know, this whole journey as we move forward. And for us, I think there's always the opportunity to continue working with SGInnovate even after we finish our current trench of development in future as we move towards, you know, the next rounds of fundraising and things like that. Not to mention the amazing talents and networks, which we are extremely optimistic about and we hope we can leverage on as time goes on. Suchi, you're on mute again, I think.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that candid chat. So let me introduce our second panelist, a project that I'm sort of actively engaged in to give you a flavor for his business with AI technology. Harold, could I ask you to introduce yourself, your role in the project, and briefly describe the technology that you and Ben are building?
Sure, thanks, Suchi. So I'm Harold. I'm an assistant professor at computer science at the US, but really, I think I'm just a geek, right? So I like understanding how things work and how to build new things. So AI technology, what we're building is tactile intelligence, right? Towards tactile intelligence. So AI or robots that can sense via touch, similar to humans, maybe even surpassing our capabilities one day. So I've been interested in tactile intelligence or tactile sensing since my, my graduate study days, so about 7-8 years ago, feeling a bit old now. My research is in an area called collaborative for assistive robotics, so robots that help human beings do things. I'm particularly interested in segments of the population that are currently not so well served by technology. So for example, during my PhD, I was working on a smart wheelchair for kids with disabilities such as cerebral palsy or spina bifida. And I was interested in helping them to get around safely while still giving them a sense of control over their movement and their environment. So I thought, you know, at the time I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be so cool, right? If I could have my wheelchair, you know, had skin so that it could sense when it would bump into things or even in people, you know, squeeze through tight spots, sense how the child is sitting, you know, his or her posture. But there was no such technology at the time, really. It was, rather, it was just very expensive. It was not very robust. Definitely not in widespread production, right? So I ended up doing some simple machine learning, or not so simple, but machine learning on small artificial skins, like on the fingertips of an iCup robot, all right? So getting it to recognize objects by touch. And I was very happy with the piece of work, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I ended up, at the back of my mind, you know, the aspect of that wheelchair project was always a little bit unfinished. So fast forward to today, and I'm like super excited because, you know, now I'm working with Ben T, who has developed this very cool, you know, scalable artificial skins, and with SGInnovate, with Suchi and David. And what we want to do is really bring tactile intelligence into the marketplace, both the hardware parts as well as the software, the AI software. So that, you know, anyone, even like financial deprived PhD students, you know, can innovate and come up with cool new tools and robots or AI that can perceive the world via its sense of touch. So the technology, right, encompasses 3 basic components, I would say. The first part is the sensing component, which is this flexible electronic skin. So imagine your skin, but basically artificial, right? Something that we can put on a robot. There's a communication aspect, which can transmit data or rather the sense of touch via this ACES or via ACES, which allows for fast asynchronous transmission. And finally, the intelligence portions, which is incorporating. So once you get all this raw data from the skin, what do you do with it, right? So that's really the focus that I focus in, the part I focus on, which is, you know, using the state-of-the-art tools in machine learning and AI, you know, to make sense of data and then use that for tasks. Okay. We're developing a platform API. So what we want is to make it easy for people to use and integrate our skin into their applications. The API should provide a range of AI-related functions, so classification of textures, you know, slip detection, and all this should be accessible very easily via robot programming frameworks such as ROS, which is widely used by many roboticists today. So maybe finally, you know, I'll have my tactile sensing wheelchair and other kinds of collaborative robots that can perceive the world via touch, manipulate objects, you know, more robustly, and also help people do things better.
That's fantastic. I think that's a very noble foundation. I certainly hope we achieve that goal for you.
I hope so too.
with AI technology, Harold, we've had these discussions before. It is a little bit different because it's not an end product that you can touch and feel. It's an enabling technology within the world of robotics and end effectors. So what were some of the challenges that this kind of nascent technology raised for you and Ben when you were thinking through building a startup using this as a foundation?
So I think the word nascent is absolutely the right one. We don't have robots everywhere right now. I think I believe it is happening and it will happen, but not yet, right? We do have robots in factories. They've been there for some time. And nowadays we are pushing them out into warehouses and they're deployed in limited settings. So for example, I think in Changi, if you wander around, sometimes you'll see a pepper robot. So there are multiple challenges in this kind of environment, this kind of nascent industry. The technology we're proposing is forward-looking. So we want to be able to convince a VC that there will be a sizable market. And it's best if we already had some experience putting the research into a working production environment and then showing some gains. So I can show performance in a lab, but it's really not the same thing, I think. And that means finding the right kind of clients as well as partners. And we also have to customize the skin for particular applications, make it super robust, the right level of sensitivity, the right AI and machine learning built in. So that entails some additional work from us, even on the R&D level. And I think that means dollars and cents. So SGInnovate has really been instrumental on this front. I think they've connected us with the grant agency who are looking to fund new deep technologies, and also with logistic companies looking to have an edge in their operations. I can't say too much more, but it's looking promising. So I'm excited about moving AI technology forward. Perhaps another challenge is the inertia. People and organizations that have a working system are maybe used to doing things their way with their current technology. So sometimes the first reaction I have when I say, okay, we have this great tactile sensing is that, oh, you know what? We already have vision, and vision is good enough for us, right? That's true in some settings, but not in many. So when we spoken to companies and things like that, there are often these cases that they can't handle because they, where vision doesn't work. There's occlusion by the gripper or some other object, and vision can't tell you exactly what the material properties are. It can't tell you softness, hardness, if it's slippery, right? So some part of the work needs to go into convincing companies that they can do better, and then finding the kind of the need points. And I think again, SGInnovate has been instrumental for that.
Thank you. Yeah, great. So Harold, thank you for that candid discussion. But you know what? This is my 2 cents on this is it is a function of being a nascent technology. Before the iPhones, no humans were actually asking for touch on a mobile, and yet it is one of the most pervasive technologies that we have in the planet today. So I'm certainly hoping that AIT gets there one day, and good luck on that journey as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to park that there, Harold. And let me introduce our third panelist who will give you a flavor for venture building a little bit differently, both from the inside view as well as the external view. Jasmine, could I request you to introduce yourself, your role in the project, and also briefly describe the technology that you're helping the founders build?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shuchi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jasmine Chiu. I am Assistant Director from SGInnovate Venture Building Team. I'm a medical doctor by training. Prior to joining SGInnovate, I had again over 7 years commercial experience, assume a wide range of responsibilities, including pharmaceutical marketing, supply chain management, operations, and business development. I am the project lead for Project Clicks under NRF Central Gate Fund, leading various activities of commercialization, bridging the gap from lab to market. So next, I'm going to give you an introduction about the technology. The inventor of Clicks technology are Dr. Ling Lim, an ENT surgeon and expert in the field for over 20 years of experience. Prof. KK Tan, who provide expertise in electrical and computer engineering to build the device. Clicks device is to address a global problem, glue ear, a layman term for otitis media. Glue ear happens when middle ear fluid, is chronically trapped behind the eardrum, resulting in recurrent fevers, infections, hearing loss, poor speech and balance, even brain infection and death. It is estimated that every year about 16 million surgeries for glue ear are needed globally, 90% in children. Direct surgical cost is $5 billion in the US alone. Therefore, we are tackling a global problem affecting millions of children with staggering healthcare costs. It is the most common reason for surgery in children under general anesthesia. In 2017, FDA had formally warned of potential brain development delays associated with general anesthesia in young children. The current standard of care, or the surgical procedure, which has been around for more than 100 years, is delayed by waiting time of weeks to months or even a year, for example, at the NHS UK. For GA, the kid need to fast for 6 hours and turns up at the cold operating theater fretful. It will require 5 to 8 supporting medical professional staff in attendance. The surgeon needs a surgical microscope and many changes of micro instruments to safely place the 1 mm diameter grommet tube onto the eardrum. What had really triggered Dr. Lin wanted to make a difference was the experience she had in Vietnam. When she was in Vietnam on a humanitarian mission, she could remove a large neck tumor in a 4-year-old child over 3 hours under local anesthesia. But because there was no GA nor expensive microscope available, she couldn't insert tiny grommet tube to treat the glue ear for 40 other kids who had checked for days to seek help. It was very frustrating for her. The aha moment came as Dr. Lin watched her daughter get her ear pierced. She wanted a handheld point and click device to insert the grommet tube safely and precisely, like how her daughter get her ear stud. It will be a smart, intelligent device and can do it without GA, without microscope. Then the surgeon can then carry it and do surgery anywhere for anyone at any time. It will improve the life of millions of children around the world and save billions of dollars in healthcare costs. Dr. Lin and Prof. Tan and the team developed a working prototype with the funding from A-STAR, BEP, POC, and POV grants. Since June 2018, SGInnovate has acted as the host institution and IEO for CLICS project under NRF Central Gate Fund, focusing on the commercialization efforts. Yeah, that's the quick introduction about myself and our project.
Thank you, Jasmine. Really appreciate that. So, you know, in the interest of time, I'm keeping an eye, a watch for the time. I might request all 3 panelists to unmute yourselves. Thank you for sharing the amazing stories, the background, your journeys with us. I hope this given the audience a really good understanding of the background, the projects at hand, some food for thought. Now, given that our audience has so many researchers, scientists that are keen to explore entrepreneurship, you know, let us know, reach out, let us catch up with you, drop us a note at venturebuilding1@sginnovate.com if that's easier. You know, post this session, we will have a short email circulated to you, which allows you to put your thoughts to paper. There's going to be an exclusive roundtable in June, which is by invite only. So do submit those templates on time. We'd love for you to be part of that roundtable. But back to the matter at hand, let us kick this off with some fundamental thoughts on commercialization. I have a couple of questions for you all, and then we will get to the Q&A box. If we don't get to your specific questions, we'll be more than happy to discuss them offline. So please don't be offended if time runs out. So let me get started with a fundamental question, right? And this can be addressed to any one of you or all three of you. If I'm working on what I believe is a revolutionary research or an innovation or a product idea that's addressing a gap in an industry, how do I know that the product has a market demand and is ready to be commercialized? I mean, should I measure commercialization capability through proof of concept, or should that be based on pilot? Should that be based on demand? What are your thoughts on this?
Who wants to go first?
Harold, since you've started, I
oh,
think
no.
you should go first.
Okay, well, I mean, it depends on who the stakeholders are, right? I think Suchi mentioned some point, Priyanka mentioned stakeholders. So to some extent, in AI technologies case, I'm the first user. I'm a first user. So I've been using the sensor and developing the AI tech alongside it in my lab on robot tasks. For example, picking and placing objects, detection, doing grasping, those kind of things. So I can totally see a research lab picking up our intelligent e-skin and then doing cool stuff with it. All right. Now in a larger commercial type environment, let's say a warehouse, where we want looking to deploy these things in actually larger scale. That's where I think you need to get some partners to collaborate, at least for our technology. So we'll bring in the tech, talk through the use cases, work together to demonstrate that it's ready, and then kind of improve the business processes. So I think that's how we can assess some amount of commercial viability, as well as doing, of course, all the standard market research and kind of stuff. But I think getting your hands dirty is very important.
I think to Harold's point, and let me just add on to that, I also see it sometimes it's something as simple as a conversation with the right people. Because when you're going into a market, especially something like medtech, it's not just consumers at one end of the table and the inventor on the other side of the table. There are many, many, many different players and many, many different pillars you need to go through while you're in this process. Like you're talking about people like clinicians who are often one of the biggest barriers to entry in a sense of, people, you're talking about health. So people tend to believe their doctors more about health than anybody else. So you want to get them on board. You want to make sure that you don't have things like barriers to entry. Like maybe there's another technology out there which allows you to, which prevents your tech from going to market. So sometimes I look at it as a combination of both objective data, like, things what Harold mentioned about market research, or sometimes even just technical data, which comes up to show that, your thing, this technology, what you've invented is better or superior to what is already existing out there. Plus a combination of stakeholder interest, not just in terms of who the stakeholders who will take it up, but also sometimes funders. Like, are there sufficient, is there a right funder? Is this the right time for this technology to enter market? Is there somebody who's going to actually believe in your technology? Because it's a long road and you will need different kind of funders and supports at different point in time. Maybe you'll have, early funding, but as you go late stage, you realize that maybe no one's willing to jump into that deep well along with you and take a risk. And sometimes even those factors play in, and it's sometimes balancing the trade-offs between where you want to keep your technology. Do you want to keep it in a public setting, or do you want to keep it in a private setting, or do you want to do it as a combination of both?
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting point, Priyanka, because all three of you have chosen to tread down a different path for procuring funds, right? You talked about funding just now. You're ensuring that your technology is validated, you're hitting the ground running, and you're not going down the traditional methods of seeking angel investments and venture funding. So share a little bit about that and seeking funding from the market. And maybe after you, Priyanka, maybe we can hear from Jasmine about that as well.
All right. So I think in WIN's case, we are exploring, which is a combination, because of WIN's nature as a medical device, which is somewhere almost like a class 2 medical device. We do have some time before we can get to market, and there are some questions and, milestones, both in terms of development and in terms of, clinical milestones, which we do need to hit before we can be something which is, before we can hit the shelves, so to speak. So in our case, the approach we took was a combination of, early funding support, which came in from organizations like Singapore by Design and SMART, the research initiative there, like SMART MIT Research and Technology Institute. So we sort of leveraged on those fundings and to do some of that early validation of some of our hypotheses and key questions which we had to answer. And that was purely driven by the fact that the amount of time we've taken to come from, we've taken from starting off or conceptualizing as an idea to actually get to where we are now is actually quite rapid, because we started off by identifying the problem first. We didn't have a technology at that point of time. And when we had the technology, we had to move quickly. So it's a question of, the right time, the right place, the right opportunity, and then moving forward. And now we are moving into this, we're exploring and we're starting to move into this partnership with SGInnovate, where we can further develop this, which allows us to hit the ground running, a few years from now, where we can go in for our first major series of private funding. And during this process, I think just because of the funding support we've gotten, as well as some of the different, pitching competitions and different engagement stakeholders we've engaged in, clinical and non-clinical, we've gotten sufficient amount of belief that there is really an unmet need which we're addressing, and there are sufficient people out there for whom this will make a huge difference, and who are more importantly willing to take a step along with us, maybe as our first customers somewhere down the line. So it's only with that assurance we really decided to go down this particular path.
Got it. Jasmine, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, that was what faced by the CLICS project before SGInnovate's involvement. So the funding hurdle was the most challenging difficulty. So the team was running out of the research grants, and the project was at the stage was too early or too risky for institutional investors to invest. So the founders talked to all the usual suspects in the local private investor community. The common feedback they got was always, oh, this is a brilliant idea. This is a promising technology, but call me when you have a product, or call me when you have a clinical validation data. So basically, the founders was faced with a situation is known as Valley of Death. Yeah. So that was the funding challenge, I think, is very common for the deep tech startups and or the deep tech technology commercialization journey.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to hit the points really quickly. I think one thing that I would like to hit before I look at the audience Q&A is certainly one more dimension. So we discussed commercialization, we discussed funding, but IP, in that road to commercializing, protecting your IP, your assets, is very, very critical as well. So what are some of the challenges, if any, faced in those steps, and what do you do to mitigate or circumvent them?
Would you like to answer that?
Harold, all yours.
Suchi, I don't know. Okay, okay. I'm the lousiest person to ask this question, to be honest, because IP, of course, is very important. But like as a computer scientist, my gut instinct, I'm an academic. And my gut instinct is to share everything the moment it's ready, right? Publish or perish sort of thing. I love open source. Honestly, I don't really like patents. But over the years, I've kind of learned to recognize that proper IP management really is very important. And I think really it's key to balance the two, all right? You need to understand what to share, when to hold back. All right. So for example, you design a new chip with better performance. Okay, maybe you want to hold that back. That's commercialization value. Okay, fine. But COVID-19 vaccine, don't patent that, share that, right? So we have to have a balance with regard to IP, I think. But maybe that's not the right answer. I don't know.
No, there is no right and wrong answer. Yeah. They're looking at you three as people who have been there, done that. So any suggestions are always welcome.
I think still doing that, we haven't quite become millionaires yet.
Right.
I think just to add on to Harold's point really quickly, there's also the value as a deep tech potential, company which will form in the future or is there right now. IP is also an asset for the company as such. It's an asset which is both, important for investors. It's an asset which is also important from things of exits, like maybe you want to go down a licensing path, and IP is what you end up selling at the end of the day and not a product. Or maybe, you're having a potential acquisition deal coming towards you, and having, proprietary IP just increases the valuation of your company. So there are I think these factors to IP as well. But to Harold's point, absolutely, there is a balance which needs to be maintained by, instead of between filing excessive IP and filing no IP at all, especially from a deep tech perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to, again, we have about 8 to 10 minutes left. I'm going to quickly get to the audience for a couple of questions. I'm going to wrap back to Jasmine and SGInnovate and then close it up. So let me look at the audience questions first. The question here is an open question. It's not specifically addressed to any individual. How do you determine whether your solution is substantially and meaningfully superior to other existing solutions in the market?
Yeah, go first.
Some passionate belief, right?
Compassionate belief, of course. I think, again, a combination of objective and subjective investigations there. Objectively, of course, you have those, certain key parameters which you obviously look for in terms of superior performance or superior efficacy or, shift in paradigm. Like clicks, for example, which has gone from a completely anesthesia, you need general anesthesia to do procedure, to you're shifting out of the hospital room into a daycare setting and you're moving into local anesthesia. That's a huge shift in paradigm. So those are some of those objective measures which are there. And then there are also elements, which look at some slightly more subjective measures in terms of, maybe there's a solution out there already, but people hate it. Or, people feel that with using your solution, and there has to be substantial investigation and belief there. Things like market research, things like, just bringing on stakeholders and just keeping on talking to them. I think you get the sense of belief in terms of, all right, by bringing in your technology, that they feel that there's substantial value add in terms of perceived value as well as objective value, what they gain from utilizing your technology over something which exists in the past, which is something what Wind is all about. Because yes, you have something like chest physiotherapy which exists, but by the name itself, you realize it's someone using you like a bongo drum. So it's painful, it's slow, it's tedious, and it just gives the other person a very good workout, which they may or may not really appreciate on a daily basis. So by coming in with something like Wind, which is providing them with both therapeutic interventions as well as helping them manage their disease in the long run and reducing their this whole expensive condition and managing it, there's a huge shift in the value what they can see being developed, and the patients perceive that value is important, and all stakeholders believe that value is something which is both extremely important for them. If that answers your question.
Definitely. So the next question is, how do you move from a lab scale to a commercial scale production? Actually, Jasmine, this might be something that you might be able to help with, because you were involved in the project at very early stages and you've seen it through many stages of evolution as well.
Yes. When we took over the Clicks project, so there was a working prototype available, but it's very far from a commercially viable product. So we need to, as you can see at the Clicks device evolution diagram, we have made tremendous progress in terms of the productization and design for manufacturers. So I think that is the key and critical activities at SGInnovate has been complementary to the founders' clinical and technical expertise. So for example, when we evaluate and select the engineering development partners and drive the whole productization and design for manufacture process. We ensure the project progress align with the committed timeline and stay within the budget. Particularly, we made critical decisions in the process from various perspectives, for example, commercialization, business, and operations. Just give you one example. We set a price target for the device in the design for manufacture process based on the market intelligence, business models, and reimbursement strategy. We also validate the market interest with the leading medical device player and distribution partners. And of course, in order to move the project forward, we still need the next round of funding. So this is what we are preparing the team for. So currently we are preparing the equity fundraising material, including building business plans and financial modeling, and attract new leadership for the team, and engaging potential institutional investors.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think we have a lot more questions. Priyanka, this is addressed to you, so maybe you can, if you could keep your response super short, and the audience could reach out to you for more details, but let's get to it. What are the key indicators that you look for in deciding to move along the value chain? In your wind product journey, what were these? Thank you.
So in case of wind, some of the key indicators we were looking in terms were both in the patient cycle of care as well as the patient cycle of the flow of money, so to speak. So the flow of care chains and the flow of money. For us, we were looking in terms of whether we were adding value to both of these areas in terms of, are we making treatment better? Are we making treatment more efficacious? And are we saving someone from added costs over the years, because the disease we are managing are chronic diseases per se. And yeah, and I think generally in a nutshell, I'll keep my answer to that, and I'll be happy to engage with the person offline as well for any further discussions.
Perfect, sounds good. So in the interest of time, I just have a couple of closing statements. I think if we were summarizing all three of your journeys, the journey to a disruptive startup is not easy, but it's not meant to be, right? The good thing is that you never travel that journey alone. At every stage of that journey, there's an entire ecosystem. There's a community that's willing to provide you that guidance, the advice, and to even help you build the company with you. So if you have that one spark, that one idea, that IP that you passionately believe in, you're thinking about commercializing it, and it all seems hard, reach out to us. Tell us why the idea is the next best thing in deep tech. And at the least, we can help you brainstorm it. And at the best, we can help you work on it. So remember, you will receive an email link with a template. So that's the way that you can communicate your ideas to us. Else, you can drop a note to us at venturebuilding1@SGInnovate.com. So thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. Huge shout out to our community team that made this magic happen. Jui, our CEO, for his thoughts and his opening. I do look forward to hearing from a whole lot of you. So see you next time, and stay safe. Thank you. And thank you so much, panelists, as well. Sincerely appreciate your time and efforts in responding to all these questions very, very patiently. Thank you.
Thanks for the platform, Suchi.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for coming to our event. Feel free to drop off the video when you're ready. Yep, and thank you everyone for attending our event and tuning in from all over the world, from Philippines, India, and Australia as well. Yep, as mentioned by Suchi, feel free to send us your idea at venturebuilding1@sginnovate.com, or do look out for our thank you emails that will be coming to you after the event. Thank you, everyone. Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.